and how that's intersects with cybersecurity. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Michael Senft. I'm the Director of Cyber Research for 6gen and a recently retired Army veteran. The standard disclaimer applies with the views expressed in this presentation being my own and do not necessarily represent the views of 6gen. As we embrace this year's theme of our warfighting workforce, talent, teams, training, and triumph, I thought it important to revisit last year's theme of past, present, and future in talking today about artificial intelligence and cyberspace operations. This isn't a technical presentation, rather a conceptual journey on the topic through the lens of three themes: skeuomorphism, Amara's law, and information theory. I'll describe each in a bit, but wanted to give everyone fair warning. We can't predict the future, but understanding the past and the present help us identify the impact of technology advances on what may become possible and what is likely to occur. Before I begin, I would like to thank Dr. Rich Hyman for our early collaboration exploring the topics I'll cover today. He's truly a thought leader on AI and greatly appreciate his insights. Okay, the bombshell revelation that I have for the audience today is that there is no data on the future. What we do have is an insatiable appetite to collect data on the present and harvest all the data available from the past. The logic behind the desire to collect all the things is understandable, given more data generally provides more accurate predictions or more useful insights. Both humans and artificial intelligence can make informed guesses about the future, but the future is constructed by the near infinite sequence of decisions and actions taken by humans. While we can't predict the future, we can identify patterns to help us better understand the past and the present to helping us prepare the future that we continuously construct through our ideas and actions. That's what I have to offer in my presentation today. So I want to quickly introduce three concepts I'll be using to examine the past, present, and future of AI and cyberspace operations. If this isn't what you were expecting, now's a perfect time to leave. I won't take any offense. That being said, sticking around will give you a new perspective on how we think about technology and its impact on military operations. The U.S. military has long been infatuated with high-tech capabilities, with its current embrace of AI being the latest example. And this embrace of AI is not new. Rather, it's only the contemporary example of an on-again, off-again relationship dating back to the 1950s. As we explore this relationship, words matter, as do recurring patterns. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results is a recipe for disappointment. So words shape the way that we communicate and the way we think. The Yupik Alaskan Native peoples have 40 different words for types of snow. In a single word, this language allows slight nuances in snow to be expressed, whereas English would require a collection of adjectives that would likely still fail to convey key information about the type of snow being described. Now take a moment to consider the terms we use to communicate and think about AI and cyberspace operations. Given the audience is a mix of government, military, and private sector, it's quite challenging to find words to describe nuanced concepts within AI and cyberspace that wouldn't confuse some portion of the group. My last assignment in the Army was teaching, of all places, at the Naval Postgraduate School, where I learned how important terminology and definitions are. Having witnessed faculty talking past each other about the same topic in the language of their respective academic fields. The end result being like ships passing in the night, rather than making constructive progress on a challenging subject. Unfortunately, there's no Rosetta Stone to help translate tech and operational speak, which is why it is incumbent upon each of us to develop the shared understanding needed for meaningful collaboration across diverse groups. I share different definitions of artificial intelligence terms to help frame our discussion, starting with the Dartmouth workshop, where the term artificial intelligence was first coined, to the latest AI guide for government available from the Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence. In the course of 70 years, I'm afraid how we describe AI has become less clear, along with perhaps what we're trying to achieve with AI. The richness of AI algorithms and techniques, from semantic nets to deep learning to convolutional neural networks, have created a situation where defining AI has become a type of inkblot test, assessing the personality and thinking patterns of the group, offering the definition, rather than providing clear utility. Granted, we could always ask the latest AI chatbot for help, but the last thing we need is more definitions. Now, shifting gears to cyber. How many times have you had a boss tell you to think outside the box? I'd imagine most of the audience. But how many times did your boss explain what that box is and why it exists? Again, don't worry, I'm not here to belabor definitions. Rather, definitions provide a common frame of reference. And that's also the point of military doctrine. If I say I'm going right and you say you're going left, if we don't have a common starting point, all bets are off which direction we are going relative to each other. However, both doctrine and definitions constrain how we think. I didn't give this much thought until I took a philosophy and science class, not recommended. But we understand the world through the words and concepts provided to us in our schooling and training. These words and concepts, however, are subjective. New concepts and technologies must be grounded in something familiar as a bridge between the past and the future, which brings me to skeuomorphism. And a drink of water. So skeuomorphism design embraces elements that mimic old recognizable forms to introduce new functionalities. And the aim of skeuomorphism, aside from being fun to say, is to emulate objects in the physical world to create a sense of comfort and intuitiveness. So skeuomorphism dates back to the 1890s, but really took off in the 1980s with the introduction of personal computers, then accelerated with Apple in the mid-2000s with the introduction of the iPhone. So here are both physical and digital examples. The example of the electric tea kettle and electric lights demonstrate in physical form how designers introduced consumers to this new concept of electricity by packaging them in a similar form despite the new possibilities created by the then new technology of electricity. And on the digital side, we see a digital notepad that has lines and texture that mimic paper, an electronic check with the same form as a physical check. And this design philosophy was very prevalent in the early days of digital interfaces, for those in the room that were around then. But again, it helped users transition from physical to digital by leveraging their existing understanding of everyday objects. It provided a bridge from the physical world to the digital one, making the transition more comfortable. Over time, as users became more accustomed to digital interfaces, the need for skeuomorphic design elements decreased. Designers began moving toward native design philosophies, creating interfaces that were digitally native. Again, if you've ever seen a toddler using an iPad, it's pretty amazing. So native design enables the presentation of complex information in novel ways, like infinite scroll for the TikTok and Instagram users out there, along with providing new ways of interacting with digital devices, like gesture-based navigation with pinch to zoom and swipe to delete. Native design prioritizes functionality and user experience optimized for the platform. This presentation was born from the realization that now that we have familiarization with the concepts of AI and cyberspace operations, we also no longer need the mimicry of other domains initially used to increase ease of adaptation to the digital concepts. Skeuomorphism constrains our thinking, and I offer that redefining both AI and cyberspace operations using their primitive element, information, provides a pathway from our current information age into the next epoch. But more on that later. So the term artificial intelligence itself is skeuomorphic. At the Dartmouth Conference in 1956, where scientific luminaries struggled to define the concept of thinking machines, neural networks, and natural language processing. The term artificial intelligence was selected by John McCarthy rather than the term cybernetics preferred by Norbert Wiener or the term complex information processing offered by Herb Simon. By focusing on the term intelligence, thinking in the field was led in a specific human direction rather than one based natively on the computation frameworks offered by Wiener and Simon. That being said, McCarthy must have had a PhD in marketing because the funding that has been lavished on artificial intelligence likely wouldn't have occurred had the term cybernetics or complex information processing been selected. Everyone can relate to some degree of intelligence, so funding research on the topic was easy to understand, instead of having to wade through a research proposal on cybernetics to figure out what the researchers were trying to do. And skeuomorphism in AI actually extends further back than the term AI itself, with research on artificial neural networks starting in 1943, which sought to understand intelligence by mimicking the neural networks found in the human brain. Even the famous Turing test created by Alan Turing in 1950 is skeuomorphic, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that we think of AI, from expert systems to the latest chatbot, in skeuomorphic terms. Shifting to cyberspace operations, the evolution of the internet is grounded in skeuomorphism, from the first email to bulletin board systems, for those in the room old enough to remember the melodic symphony generated by dial-up modems. From the global information grid to zero trust, our conceptualization of information flow and protection is highly skeuomorphic. Unfortunately, the complexity of digital systems is abstracted away by this skeuomorphism. Defense in depth briefs well, but is meaningless when a single vulnerability can result in complete system compromise. Even zero trust is a skeuomorphic extension of physical security measures, verify identity and check permissions every time before granting access. In both cases, you have to trust something, the physical security guard, or in case of zero trust, the policy engine. Skeuomorphism generates ambiguity with complexity, exemplified by a bit of humor. Does anyone know the difference between a used car salesman and a cybersecurity salesman?
One of them sells cars.
Fair enough, but actually the used car salesman knows when they're lying. And why? Because our language is adequate to describe the complexity of automobiles and their faults. And I'm not trying to disparage any cybersecurity vendors in the room, but rather highlight the impact when our skeuomorphic crutches fail to capture the complexity of the technology. Our thinking about defensive cyberspace operations is likely skewed by skeuomorphism. A cyber Pearl Harbor connects current concerns in cyberspace with a historic example, but these terms fail to address the elephant in the room. Our cybersecurity failures have resulted in the greatest transfer of wealth in history, to quote Keith Alexander, from the loss of research and intellectual property, which really has no historical example to reference. As for key cyber terrain, I've spent a lot of time while in the military talking about the topic, with the realization the term is both necessary and counterproductive, given the necessity and difficulty in describing the complex web of dependencies for digital systems and networks. On the offensive cyber side of the house, the decision to treat cyber effects, or to be more accurate, effects delivered in and through cyberspace, to kinetic effects in terms of deny, degrade, disrupt, destroy, manipulate, is skeuomorphic. And this skeuomorphism is understandable, providing a bridge between nebulous concepts like computer network attack with the war-fighting function of fires. This, however, has created a situation where in many cases, it's easier to drop a bomb than a packet. At this point, someone in the audience is supposed to shout about authorities, but I think it misses the mark. Our collective understanding of cyberspace operations is shaped by skeuomorphic influences. As we look to the future, what got us here won't get us there. So there is a need for each of us to rethink how we think about the cyberspace domain. The current framework and authorities for employment of offensive cyberspace operations are choices made for a different era, much like the decision to prohibit unrestricted submarine warfare by the United States Navy, spanned over 2 decades prior to World War II and changed overnight with the attack in Pearl Harbor. Now to Amara's Law, which is also easier to say. So Amara's Law is closely tied to human psychology, especially the cognitive biases and heuristics that shape our thinking. We're naturally inclined to concentrate on immediate outcomes, often underestimating the subtle and exponential impacts of change over time. This tendency, referred as impact bias, causes us to focus on short-term benefits at the expense of understanding the long-term effects of our actions. The influence of Amara's Law can be seen across many aspects of both AI and cyberspace operations. Amara's Law is highly instructive in thinking about generative AI, as the euphoria surrounding generative AI fades around us. The initial excitement surrounding new AI technologies often leads to inflated expectations. This has happened repeatedly since the 1960s, but this time is different, I promise. But practically, overestimations of technology lead to significant consequences, including bubbles in investment and skewed research priorities. Startups may receive copious funding based on hype rather than viable, scalable solutions, potentially leading to a misallocation of resources. This phenomenon was evident in the AI winters of the 1970s and 1980s, where the failure of AI to live up to its hype resulted in severe contraction of interest and funding for AI research. Over the long term, however, AI will continue to transform economies and societies in ways that are difficult to predict. This balance involves fostering a realistic understanding of what AI can achieve in the short term while preparing strategically for its long-term implications as we learn to harness the power of statistical alchemy. In contrast to AI, I would argue the foundation of cyberspace, the internet, is a case of reverse Amara's Law, where the impact of a project that started as an afterthought was woefully underestimated, perhaps because of a lack of a skeuomorphic example to bridge the familiar with novel. Recall, ARPANET began as a risky $1 million research bet folded into a $61 billion air defense system called SAGE, built by the United States in the 1960s, back when $1 billion was a lot of money. As we consider the evolution of computer security to information security to now cybersecurity, Amara's Law is instructive. Recall, we are inclined to concentrate on immediate outcomes, often underestimating the subtle and exponential impacts of change over time. Unfortunately for national security, failing to secure information rarely has immediate outcomes, unlike, let's say, failing to lock your car and having your bag stolen. As we look at the timeline of security luminaries, from Willis Ware to J.P. Anderson to Roger Shell, their words and research predicted the security predicament we find ourselves in. Likewise, the wily hacker tracked by Clifford Stoll and the Cuckoo's Egg to Moonlight Maze were warnings largely unheeded. From SolarWinds to the Colonial Pipeline hack of today. As I describe in my recent magazine article in the MCPA magazine, where attackers' advantage in cyberspace, an enduring feature of the domain, when combined with our natural inclination to underestimate the impacts of change over time, has placed the United States in a precarious position with no easy answers to mitigate the threat posed by adversary cyber activity to national security. And recall, throughout history, the U.S. has been separated by 2 oceans from the rest of the world, but now our adversaries are milliseconds away from being able to create effects here in the U.S., but hopefully not during my speech. So now, finally, to information theory. Some might disagree information is a measurable quantity, but the bit a 0 or a 1, true or false, now dominate our lives. My slides, my script, this recording, all encoded in a stream of zeros and ones. And that's who I blame for the cybersecurity mess. But as we explore the information theory, I offer it is also responsible for much of the disconnect experienced by military cyber professionals and their respective services. The Department of Defense exists to conduct organized violence as deemed necessary by the United States government. As such, DoD leaders at all levels are managers of violence. To quote Chris Cleary, F-18s don't drop picnic baskets. Conversely, the intelligence community are managers of information. They find creative ways of violating the confidentiality of information from a variety of sources, then manage the distribution of this information on a need-to-know basis. These are two very different perspectives, different timelines, and different outcomes. Even with the ongoing debate in recent research paper advocating creation of an independent cyber force, there is little discussion of this divide. When does manipulation of information rise to the level of violence? At what layer? Authoritarian states like China and Russia have doctrine reflective of the holistic nature of information warfare, merging management of violent information and informative violence, while U.S. doctrine offers stovepipes for violence and information. I'll pause in this thought right now, but I will return to it. Returning to the topic of AI, I offer that Herb Simon was right in describing what we consider AI as complex information processing. While I enjoy debates on the emergence of artificial general intelligence, arguing over a nebulous term like intelligence is not productive. Rather, complex information processing captures the essence of generative AI, its ability to transform a series of input tokens into a new series of output tokens that provide some utility to a user. Transitioning from terminology polluted by skeuomorphism to native terminology grounded in foundational concepts offers the opportunity for clarity of thought and expression, and perhaps keep artificial general intelligence at bay for a little while longer. Likewise, if we think about cyberspace operations in terms of its basic element, information, we free ourselves of the shackles of skeuomorphism to ground ourselves in native design. Conceptualizing cyberspace as an information reality was first offered over 30 years ago in a book about supercomputing. Focus on information enables a more holistic approach to cyberspace operations, starting with the physical layer, layer 1, to layer 8, the individual and beyond. I think these definitions would also help bridge the divide between managers of violence and managers of information by clearly identifying the discrete aspect of information being manipulated and to what end. As we look into the future, a common theme is that AI will redefine cyberspace operations, not by emulating past techniques, but by pioneering innovative strategies that leverage the unique capabilities of advanced AI models and algorithms. In this future, AI becomes an integral part of the dynamic interconnected ecosystem where cybersecurity is no longer about defending static perimeters, but rather adapting to an evolving and ever-changing digital landscape. While there is no data on the future, skeuomorphism and Amara's law suggest the future will look a lot like the present. When it comes to AI and cyberspace operations, I offer that the cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders will continue with evolutionary rather than revolutionary changes. For all the excitement for generative AI and improving the capabilities of both attackers and defenders, Amara's law offers key insights. I'm reminded of a recent blog post by reachers at Trail of Bits who found that LLMs could perform only as well as experts or as significantly upskilled novices for tasks that were reducible to natural language processing, such as writing, phishing emails, and conducting misinformation campaigns. For other cyber tasks, such as creating malicious software, finding vulnerabilities in source code, and creating exploits, current generation large language models had novice-like capabilities and could only marginally upskill novice users. These results speak to the lack of reasoning and planning capabilities in large language models, which have been well documented. This is why I offered that the dramatic impact of AI on cyberspace operations lies not in layers 2 through 7, but rather at layers 1 and 8, 9, 10. Layers 2 through 7 can be easily modified, resulting in a perpetual continuation of the cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders. Layer 1 and Layer 8 are a different story. As for the future, we face an asymmetric information battlefield. For authoritarian regimes, their existence is dependent on controlling the flow of information within their borders. The Great Firewall of China is probably as much about controlling the internal flow of information than it is about keeping external information out. Conversely, free information flow underpins the legitimacy of democratic nations. AI enables authoritarian regimes to execute their information operations with increased speed and precision of messaging. We only need to look at TikTok to understand the impact of skillfully weaponized AI in the information domain. If anyone has a Layer 8 patching solution, let's talk afterwards. And as we look at Layer 1, conflict in Ukraine is a stark reminder that everything starts at Layer 1. Back in 2015, I wrote an article for the MCPA magazine about physical layer jamming threats. Nearly a decade later, think about the art of the possible, leveraging AI technologies to manipulate electronic signals at the bit level in real time. So wrapping up, here we are today at HammerCon to enable our war-fighting workforce to triumph over our adversaries. These words from General Retired James Mattis help frame what is needed as we work to enhance our information operations capabilities with the powerful combination of AI technologies and the wealth of information readily available in cyberspace. The enemy's free will, manifested by courage, imagination, resolve, and other human factors, denies predictability in most aspects of war. We must use focused training and technology, enabled solutions, or problem-solving techniques to enhance initiative, pattern recognition, and decentralized decision-making. The joint force must act in uncertainty and thrive in chaos, sensing opportunity therein and not retreating into a need for more information. Both AI and cyberspace have enabled an insatiable demand for more information. Much like Laplace's demon, if we can only add more sensors, more processing, more AI algorithms, then we can eliminate uncertainty from the battlefield by predicting our adversaries' actions. The danger of this approach was highlighted by the failure of Israel's tremendous investment in artificial intelligence and high-tech surveillance on the Gaza border to detect the largest surprise attack on Israel since the 1973 Yom Kippur War by Hamas in October last year. As we look at our warfighting workforce, we should never forget the true nature of conflict is complex and unpredictable. Embracing uncertainty requires us to move beyond our skeuomorphic conceptualization about AI and cyberspace operations, grounding our understanding of these technologies in terms of their fundamental element, information. So now I'd like to take any questions in the time remaining. I know we're ahead of schedule, but if you're like my former students, as much as they enjoyed me speaking. But again, also glad to share my experience transitioning from the military into industry. It's a journey I'm happy to help anyone getting ready to separate, and appreciation for those who helped me on my path. So questions? Yes, sir.
It's a philosophical question I've been fighting for a long time. We do things with AI to make human beings more efficient versus replacing AI. But I see lots of people pushing having AI as the solution, what I call, people call defensive machine things, speed things like that. Do you see, is there a push for value in human-machine collaboration? Or do you see people in cyber pushing to have machines, primacy where machine drives this?
I think it really comes down to what you're trying to sell, either a product or research. But for me, in my own research and perspective, is it's really about human AI teaming, of identifying, humans are really good at operating under conditions of uncertainty, whereas, machines are really good at parsing huge volumes of data. So how do you use those complementary strengths? I know especially when we look at like red teaming, a lot of work with Mitres Caldera. I mean, that's really a super team, but then what they're actually trying to address is both the planning and decision-making challenges. And given the complexity of articulating what's between our ears, if you're involved in, red team or offensive, defensive operations, and actually putting that programmatically into a system is really difficult versus, really looking at the tasks that humans perform and how they can be augmented by these AI technologies. And again, for me, huge Herb Simon fan, +1 for sciences of the artificial, but again, it's complex information processing versus like intelligence. What is it? Like we could have a debate all day about, what is intelligence, the nature of intelligence from the Turing test to, whatever concept that we think about today versus what's actually happening. And I think as I look at AI, machine learning, generative AI, again, it's complex information processing. You take some tokens, you put it into a black box, and it comes out with a new set of tokens that's hopefully useful. And even going back to work from Churchman in looking at decision-making systems and what is the guarantor. I think I look at things at a more kind of fundamental level. You have inputs, you have a function, you have outputs, and you have some guarantor. In the case of AI, that guarantor is that statistical alchemy.
Hey, can we give Michael a hand?